I think.
Yep, good to go. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. And thank you all for joining us. I want to say a special welcome to Janine from the Arkansas State Library, one of Colet's colleagues with the continuing education coordinators from state libraries around the country. So Janine, welcome. Super glad to have you with us. This website chat format is just going to be a little bit different from some of our others, in part because with the holidays and time off, we don't have a lot of sort of the newsy updates from the state library that we typically like to share in the website chats. And instead, we want to take a deeper dive into some conversations that we have been having both internally and with the Network Advisory Council, and a little bit with the Commission and the Montana Library Association about resource sharing. There's a couple of reasons why we have been thinking very deliberately about resource sharing and what it is. One is that, as we've talked a little bit about in these website chats, we're looking at the cost share formulas that we use to help fund some of these resource sharing opportunities and trying to simplify what those cost share formulas look like. And in receiving feedback about that process and the funding related to those programs, we have come to understand how important it is for all of you to have information and language about what these services are and the impact that they have to help you better communicate that information to your boards and users in your community. And then the second reason why we are thinking a lot about resource sharing right now is that we're already starting to talk about the 2025 legislative session, which will be here in less than a year, and a legislative ask that we have begun to talk about amongst the staff and with Montana Library Association and with the Trust for Montana Libraries to really sort of fully fund some existing statutes that talk about the fact that the legislature should provide funding for resource sharing. So for those reasons, we think it's really important for us to have a really thoughtful dialogue with the Montana Library community about what resource sharing is. I'm going to advance some slides. You are already Zoom pros, and then let you know that that's what we want to talk with you all about today. So I hope this will be informative. We really do want this to be a bit of a dialogue today, so I hope that you'll be willing to share some of your thoughts as we go forward. So we've been working on kind of an internal definition of resource sharing. I think some of us sort of have had this understanding of what we mean when we talk about resource sharing, and we'll get into some real specifics here in a little bit, but we didn't really have a sort of a succinct way to talk about that. And so we've kind of come up with this internal definition that we've been sharing. Again, this is an area where I would love your feedback about whether or not this definition aligns with your thinking about the resources that we share as libraries in Montana or not, and how it might differ from your way of thinking. The definition that we've come up with, as the slide says, is any resource, including but not limited to the information resources themselves, the technologies like the Montana Shared Catalog platform, expertise, the fact that we actually share knowledge and expertise amongst our library staff, and services that are shared by Montana libraries of any type in service of their users to ensure that Montanans have access to the library content and information services they need. And that last portion of the definition harkens back to our Fair Library Access Resolution that speaks to our work in terms of ensuring that all Montanans have access to the information that they need to be successful in their lives. So it's, as is said, it's the information, it's technology, it's resources, expertise that we share together, or that we might share in the future, that are in service of our patrons. I'm gonna let that kind of filter through a little bit, ask if there's any immediate reaction, and I hope that maybe you'll kind of ruminate on this definition as we take a little bit of a history trip through resource sharing in Montana. So we're going to be talking about some of the rich history of resource sharing. If we apply that definition, certainly the activities dating back to the 19th century, the late 1800s, I would characterize as resource sharing, although I don't think we were using that kind of terminology at that time. And as you can see, it advances from the very physical form of the books that we were sharing through to some of the early technology resources, and now the very mobile, hands-on technology environment that Montanans expect to find information resources through their libraries. And as I said in the definition, and also this critically actually found in statute, resource sharing is sharing amongst all libraries in Montana. It's not just our public libraries. To the extent possible, the state library approaches all of our resource sharing activities with the idea that it should benefit all libraries and all library patrons. You know, we have some restrictions that are based on vendor requirements and resources available to us, but to the extent possible, and importantly, as directed by statute, we do view resource sharing as being inclusive of and available to all libraries in Montana. So I'm going to ask Colette to walk us through just a sort of a fascinating overview of resource sharing. And I think it's important to call it that, as I said, dating back to the late 1800s. So Colette, thank you for all of your fantastic research and for organizing all of this really interesting information for us.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I hope everyone finds it as fascinating and engrossing as we do. Certainly, as librarians, it's an occupational hazard to dive deeply into the information that we have. And so it's really been a great journey to look at what do we mean by resource sharing. And these next couple of slides are just kind of some selected milestones and highlights that hopefully give a context to resource sharing that speaks to all parts of that definition that Jenny was sharing. And so one of the things that surprised me is that when Montana became a state and statutes were being put on the books, one of the first statutes that related to libraries included a statute that created what was called circulating libraries. And really what that consisted of was crates, cartons of books that were purchased. And in the early days, in most cases, those were housed and kind of put together by the State Historical and Miscellaneous Department, what we know now as the Montana Historical Society, and the University of Montana. The University of Montana at the time had the beginnings of a really great library, and it was staffed by a librarian that we have really come to know and love, Gertrude Buckhouse. who had gone away for library school and came back home to Missoula. And so she was very instrumental, along with Laura Howie, who was the librarian at the State Historical Society, for making sure that these boxes of books got to the places around the state that they needed to go. And that happened through mail or freight. It happened by shipping things on the rail lines that were more extensive in the state at the time. People hopped in their cars and brought cartons and crates of books with them. And so really, the idea from the legislature and put into the statute was that there would be these sets of books that could be shared, especially in communities that didn't have a library already established in them. Kind of moving forward in time, and that, as we saw communities grow, we saw the establishment of county library systems. That was also part of statute that was passed by the legislature, and that was very much supported and sought after by not just the librarians, but the brand new Montana Library Association at that time. We also, because looking at sharing and needing the infrastructure to make that happen across the State Library Commission was a law that was passed in 1929. It wasn't actually funded until 1946, but that was when the first state librarian was hired. Her name was Ellen Torgrimson. She was the first person to really have that title. And then, things really progressed from there as staff was more available, and the needs for traveling collections actually continued into, really into the present time. It wasn't really until the mid-50s when federal funding became available that we really saw things like bookmobiles and other types of sharing happening. So I think probably all of us who are professional librarians recognize the term interlibrary loan. That's really, from the 50s and even currently is a term that we kind of have as synonymous with resource sharing. But there were statutes in place, including funding, much of it supported by those federal dollars again, but Montana codified resource sharing over this period, from the 70s into the 80s and 90s, is really when we see technology influencing how we share things. Not just putting crates of books into cars and on into the mail and that, but really looking at computer-based catalogs so that we could know what libraries held what materials. So I can't emphasize enough that really in the 70s was when we saw technology having a huge impact on how we share information and resources, but then also we see the change in the formats as well. So as you see on this slide in particular, we have these rules and these laws and funding about resource sharing, and then we begin to see things like the Montana Shared Catalog begin. First, it was called the Western Montana Catalog. It was a smaller group of libraries. Missoula Public Library headed up that effort. And then as things have developed over time, the need for that statewide support and administrative actual structures to help it move along. We have the Montana Shared Catalog being administered at the state library beginning in 2002. And then you also see the beginnings of what becomes the Montana Library to Go collections, the e-content that we're able to share more readily across libraries and types of libraries. So not just the materials being shared, but actually the cost of running that system being shared as well. So we've seen changes over times in some of the administrative rules. There's definitely been fluctuations in the amount of funding, both from the federal level as well as the state. And we can go into more detail about some of those things. Some of those are memories that some of us have with things that came and went away because of funding sources. That's more for a later time. But as we're looking at really this, moving into the 2020s, we're looking at resources being shared across libraries. Those are digital resources. Those continue to be physical materials. We see the implementation of the courier system, which again, a Montana library, Butte Silver Bow Library, kind of kicked things off. And then it grew from those pioneers essentially saying, yeah, we want to try this and do this, and then bringing other partners and other libraries on board with that effort. And including in 2016, when the Trails Consortium, which is the academic libraries, formed their own official memorandum of understanding between the university system libraries to leverage the dollars and the collections that they had for that group. So that's kind of like a really quick and maybe a little bit inelegant overview of some major timelines and milestones. But just know that, when we think about what is coming in the future, I think, we've had great minds and great innovators and those pioneers who have seen challenges that have come up over time and then found some really creative ways to work through that. So this is just kind of a fun thing. Literally in the territorial times, when there were free libraries or subscription libraries, into the 1890s, when the mail was sometimes still delivered by horseback from remote community to whatever. And we see the rise of the bookmobiles, the first bookmobile with the Northwest Federation centered up in Libby back in the 50s. The bus systems have always been great partners over time. And then thinking about that impact of technology, card catalogs being the things that we know and love, and the smell of the card and the whiteout and the typing of the cards and everything, but moving to things like microfiche for publishing regional and statewide collections or catalogs and materials, and moving into those early computers. And then what I think is lovely too, to think about resource sharing and how it happens, is that bookmobiles are one of those things that have been so effective in getting resources to patrons who can't come to our main locations and libraries. So, there might be old solutions to new problems, but I think that warrants us thinking about what are the things that we do right now that are very effective in supporting our patrons and getting the resources that we can share on their behalf and make sure that their needs are met. I was going to just mention really quickly too, for those of us who remember the Western Library Network LaserCat and getting CD-ROMs. And I love this little section that you see on this slide, talking about how you would have to have a computer and 3 CD-ROM players in order to have access to the LaserCat catalog. But at the time, that was just revolutionary. I could see, and my students, when I was a school librarian, could see the holdings of all of these libraries from across the Pacific Northwest, and that was revolutionary at the time. We look at CD-ROMs, and maybe we laugh a little bit. We look fondly. Maybe some of us have, I don't know, archives of things that we still have stored on CD-ROMs, but different technology, all in service of making sure that we can discover and deliver the things that our patrons want. I was just going to mention really quick too, Jenny, and you can give me the hook here if you need to. But when we look at where the shared catalog today is, in terms of a technology solution that enables sharing and how materials move, how we have these unique sharing groups that partner across the state, and we see that the amount of resources that move around the state through the Courier Alliance now too. It's pretty amazing to see who's being reached and just the volume of that service. I wanted to just share this picture too of the Courier Alliance map. And if you're not aware of kind of the extent of the courier, this is a great way to see, well, where is that network happening? Where are the gaps, obviously, and be thinking about how we move together to think about solutions and support of that system. Um, and then Montana Library to Go, which is something that really, in terms of e-content or resource sharing of digital materials, this is just a snapshot of the data from the previous fiscal year. But you see the extent of where patrons are. You see the extent of the holdings that Montana Library to Go is able to deliver, as well as the checkouts, and just realize that that is a combined effort, both from the funding that supports this, the incredible work that local libraries do in connecting their patrons with these shared resources. I just think it's a great testament to the work that we've all done together on behalf of patrons and using resource sharing as the way to guide us forward. So with that, Jenny, I will turn it back to you.
Thanks. And Colette, I have to say that nothing you do is inelegant. So I really appreciate that overview and deep dive. I think, even for those of us who've been around for a long time, just to reflect back on all of the effort that has gone into shaping the resources that we're able to offer our patrons today it's just really helpful. And I'm always reminded of the phrase, we stand on the shoulders of those who've come before, the people who had the vision and the ideas for creating the kinds of services that we've offered. Also thinking a little bit about the services that have that have come and gone. Not everything has to stand the test of time. Colette pointed out the bookmobiles, and it's wonderful to see a resurgence in those bookmobiles in the state after having most of them gone away for some time. Thinking about our statewide databases that we used to fund and are offering in different ways, and thinking about what kinds of funding may be necessary for us to provide those kinds of database and media services in different ways in the future. Some of you might remember Question Point. I can't remember what we called it, but it was the shared reference service that we offered for a short time, kind of around the 2010 timeframe. Relatively short-lived, didn't really have a lot of use and longevity, so we decided that it was something we were not going to continue. But another example of a way that we came together to support resources and services in support of our patrons. So where are we now? As I said, we do have this need to try to provide a more effective cost share formula to help to fund some of these services, as well as a very strong hope and desire to see the legislature provide more funding for these services. Again, there's statute that says that the state library makes use of funds from the legislature in support of resource sharing, but there really isn't any what I would consider substantial dedicated funds for that purpose. And so we want to make that point to the legislature and work to try to increase the amount of funding that's available. So as we contemplate what those kinds of asks should look like, I think it's really important for us to evaluate the services that we're currently offering. Are they having the reach and the impact that we want them to have? Where is the gaps in service that we have with our current offerings? We know, for example, there may be other libraries that want to join the shared catalog. The courier certainly doesn't come close to serving the extent of the state that we would hope that it would support. Many of you are offering database and online e-resources services to your communities that you are funding yourselves, and are there ways for us to more collaboratively work together to help to provide those services in a more cost-effective way for our libraries. Um, and then thinking beyond what we're currently offering to what kinds of services might your patrons be asking for? Is there information? Is there technology or services that are starting to percolate or that you're hearing about that you're excited about, or at least interested in exploring, that in this model, in this behavior that we have of coming together, should we be thinking about, and might there be models for us to think about future resource sharing, in the same way that people said, hey, we should share an ILS, hey, we should provide shared access to ebooks, etc. Um, so those are the kinds of questions that we are asking ourselves, and importantly, the kinds of questions that we need to be asking all of you. And again, that's why I wanted to raise this topic for our website chat today. I know Kara is on the chat with us today. She's our go-to person for helping to coordinate the consortial work and the context behind a lot of these services. So she's certainly someone that I lean on to help guide our thinking in these matters. And Kara, I invite you to add anything else that you would want to add and open it up for thoughts, ideas, questions, and discussion.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Colette, for that's really wonderful overview of our resource sharing history. And I think, like Jenny said, we are standing on the shoulders of people who came before us. And when I think about the last 20 years of our program development at the State Library in the area of resource sharing, in the 2000s, they were establishing some programs that have become our major programs, Shared Catalog and OCLC Group Services and Montana Library to Go. And I think the last decade, we have really focused on scaling up those programs and standardizing operations. And we're at a point where I think those programs run pretty well, but there's certainly more that we could do to enhance them and bring them up to speed for your needs as your needs in your libraries and your communities are changing. So we'd really like to hear more about that. What's working well, what could work better, what's on your wish list. And I know we're going to touch on this in a little bit when we talk about upcoming events, but we'll have an opportunity at MLA to also ask you these questions and to walk you through some exercises to kind of understand what success looks like for your libraries and maybe how resource sharing could help you to achieve those success measures.
And just one more point that I wanted to raise here. We have had a goal that we are starting to work on in conjunction with the Network Advisory Council, looking at sort of the geographic divide and the geographic barriers that exist in a state the size of ours in providing library services to patrons. So Rebecca, our data coordinator, is going to be working with some of our GIS staff, and I'm sure she'll be asking for input from all of you about the reach of our library services. We obviously have our physical buildings, we have the kinds of services like Montana Library to Go that you can really use from anywhere as long as you have an internet connection. We have bookmobiles that serve certain areas. Can we map that, and in doing so, identify the geographic gaps in our state that are currently not served or underserved in terms of library services, and then what kinds of resources might be available for us to provide more reach to those areas. Really looking forward to working on that study and figuring out what it might reveal as well. Again, I said I hope that this could be a bit of a discussion today. So really curious what thoughts, questions, ideas this might have sparked for some of you. Maybe I could get a thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat if you think we're on the right track in this kind of these thought exercises that we're going through. Kara asked in the chat, what's on your wish list? And I would say this is a point where we need to dream big. North Valley Public Library is working on a new building. I think that is a very important dream and opportunity for you. Colleen talks about the importance of broadband, and you're exactly right. And that's one of the reasons why we have staff really dedicated at looking at the federal funding that's come to the state to expand broadband to unserved areas of the state. And then as some of the digital equity funding becomes available, looking at how we can use that to continue to support technology enhancement, adoption, and education through libraries. You're exactly right. I'm glad that Kara was able to be with you, Margie. Sam too talks about the importance of broadband and a bookmobile. Sam, are you guys hoping to get a bookmobile? Do you have one already? You don't, do you? Good. All right. I'll let you stretch while we talk about some upcoming events. It looks like Jennifer just added more to the chat, more database options, budget that your budget can't sustain. The book lockers, that is something that I am very interested in as well. You know, we definitely know that North Dakota next door is seeing some success with book lockers. Super curious to know if they have a role to play, especially as we start looking at this geographic study. So this is really just the start of these kind of deeper conversations that we want to be having ongoing up to and through the next legislative session. So I wanted to bring your attention to some upcoming events that we have, and in particular, the February 16th commission meeting, the March 11th Network Advisory Council meeting, and then, as Kara mentioned, a program that will be during the Montana Library Association conference focused on these kinds of resource sharing. The February 16th commission meeting, it's really going to be structured mostly as a work session where we are going to be talking with the commission about our goals and the resources necessary to help us achieve those goals. And of course, in particular, we'll be focusing on these kinds of resource sharing needs that we've identified as we work through the spring. Then we'll be working with the commission to prioritize goals and resource requests ahead of the planning process for the legislative session. So in the coming weeks and months, we really hope that you'll be engaged with us around this topic of resource sharing to help us craft the best possible legislative ask. And then, as I said, we will use some of this information, I hope, to help you have examples and language and the ability to describe the impact of what these kinds of resources mean for you and your libraries and your patrons as we talk about how they're funded in the future. Colette or Kara, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think I just wanted to point out with these upcoming events that there are some additional events that will be added, including, as Jenny mentioned, the session that's going to be held as part of the Library Association conference. But do regularly check in on that Aspen calendar, whether it's an actual continuing education event or an opportunity to engage with various committees or working groups. That Aspen calendar is something to regularly check. I was going to say too, we did an update with Aspen overnight last night that kind of cleans up the homepage in that. So if you haven't taken a look at that, we're pretty excited about some upcoming improvements with Aspen as well. And just also to mention, this is a lot to think about, and we gave you a lot of words and visuals to think about. Please do bring your thoughts, share those with us as you have time to kind of think those over and really reflect on what questions, what needs are your patrons asking for that require that scalability and support of statewide resources and services. So yeah, just be thinking, and we really are excited about the conversations that are to come. I was going to say also, if someone has had a thought that it would be easier to say rather than type, you can unmute yourself and volunteer your thoughts and comments. We'd really like to hear from you directly. It's lovely to hear your voices as well. We always have these links and places that you could come and learn more. I would really encourage you, if you haven't taken a look at the YouTube channel, we've added a bunch of small training opportunities for trustees in particular. So take a look at those, and there's more coming in that channel as well. Including it's a project that's taking a little bit more time, but today actually is going to be really helpful to wrap this up. I'll be doing a video that gives more of that history and timeline of resource sharing, goes into a little bit more details, and then there'll be some accompanying materials for that too. So look for that in the YouTube channel in the next week or so. And also, I did put the link to our evaluation survey in the chat, but this is a way you can snap a picture and get right to that evaluation survey. We really do appreciate your comments, and we do take the time to review those as they come in. So that is greatly appreciated. And always, be in touch, certainly with Jenny, but also especially Kara, as these conversations go forward and as you have time to kind of digest and think about what we've asked today too. Don't hesitate to be in touch with Kara as well.
Thank you all for joining us. Do note that February's website chat is going to be the third Friday rather than the second Friday. The commission meeting has been pushed back to the 16th rather than the 14th. So we're pushing back the February chat by a week. So I hope to see you there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Colleen.